Welcome to the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable, our final one for the year. I'm Andrew Marks, co-founder and Chief Customer Officer of Success Hacker and Chief Product Officer for the Success Coaching Training Program. I'm Chief Everything Officer these days. Thrilled to be leading this discussion on supporting employee well-being and mental health. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, where we've empowered nearly 40,000 students from 96 countries with our globally acclaimed customer team-focused professional development programs, whether it's self-paced online learning or dynamic virtual boot camps. We've got a program that suits your team's unique needs, regardless of the role: customer success, customer support, customer service. Having a mindset focusing on helping your customers achieve a return on their investment with your organization is paramount. You can find all the details of our offerings on our website, successcoaching.co, or in the chat where Ashley will provide links and any coupon codes that we're offering. For newcomers, this is where real-world advice meets practicality. We invite industry experts to share their experiences, ensuring our discussions remain grounded in the everyday challenges of customer success. Regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, or the size of the customers your teams deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful for you. A few housekeeping items before we get things going. This webinar is recorded, and we will be posting a replay and transcript on our website early next week. We encourage active participation, so please feel free to ask your questions using that Q&A button located at the bottom of your Zoom interface. Questions with higher upvotes will receive priority during the Q&A session, so use that upvoting functionality. And for our LinkedIn Live audience, you can also post your questions directly, and they will be relayed to us. Thank you, Santana. To maintain a smooth discussion, please use the chat window exclusively for commentary while directing your questions to the Q&A window. And if you mess that up, don't worry, Ashley will remind you. But we very much appreciate your engagement. In the world of customer success, you'll find plenty of smart ideas and theories. But in this series, we're all about getting real. We're here to talk practical advice, tried and true tricks, and stories from folks who live and breathe customer success every day. That's why I'm thrilled to have these three amazing panelists with us today. These are people who really know their stuff, and we can't wait to hear what they've got to say. So without any more delay, let's kick things off. I feel like Snoop there. Without, I should break into some sort of rhyme. Let's kick things off by having our panelists introduce themselves to y'all and tell us a bit about who they are and what they do. And let's get started, as usual, in alphabetical order with Jenelle Friday.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenelle Friday. I'm located in Northern Colorado. I have a background of being in customer success for about 14 years, and I'm still in customer success. I work with a company called Whale, if you know who Steno Smith is. He and I work directly together. I also own a company called Lionheart CS. We focus on tactical emotional intelligence training. There's a podcast coming in January. There's a book coming in Q1 next year. So just really excited to be here with these lovely ladies and excited for the topic and discussion today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenelle. Always good to see you. Jenelle is one of my favorite empaths out there. So, and I'm glad that we got to spend some quality time together back in September at the CS 100. Maria, you're up. And please make sure to mention your latest book. So proud of you that you're able to drop this back in September.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Maria Ross. I am a speaker, an author, a brand strategist, a podcast host, and basically an empathy advocate. I've worked with sales teams most of my career, supporting them in both consumer environments and B2B. And I have my own consultancy, Red Slice, where I help progressive, forward-thinking leaders and teams leverage the power of empathy to achieve radical success. So I have my latest book that came out is The Empathy Dilemma, which is subtitled, very applicable to this talk today, How Successful Leaders Balance Performance, People, and Personal Boundaries, or you can read that as mental health. So I'm thrilled to be here and share some of the research and the stories and the interviews from folks like you who've been in the trenches and are trying to manage being people-centered leaders.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Maria and I go way back. It's been now more than 20 years since Maria, in her role at Business Objects, supported our services team. You remember that coffee date that we had in San Mateo many years ago when I pitched you this idea of a customer success training program? So yeah. Maria was actually one of those people that one of my advisors when we were getting this thing going as well. So She's kind of been along for the ride, and look where it's gotten me. Once again, you can interpret that however you want. And last but not least, Suzy.
Hey folks, my name is Suzy Goodwin. I'm logged in from North Carolina, and I have been in well-being in some form or fashion for the last 20 years or so. Education-wise, hold a master's in health promotion, and I'm a certified health education specialist. I am in the trenches with you in customer success and serve as a CSM at AirVet. We're an employee benefit. We do telehealth and telemedicine for your four-legged friends.
And formerly one of Santa's elves up in the North Pole, apparently. Yeah.
Fact.
Love that. Love that. That's one of those two truths and a lie facts that you throw out there.
Love that.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for being here today. Let's get to the topic at hand. The pursuit of customer satisfaction metrics and revenue targets is fundamentally at odds with employee mental health in customer-facing roles. Our industry's obsession with customer happiness often comes at the direct expense of our team's well-being. And so today we're going to challenge this paradigm and explore how prioritizing employee mental health is the key to achieving superior customer outcomes. So when did we decide that customer success meant employee sacrifice?
I'm just going to jump in here. I think we as a panel kind of talked about this before, but I think we felt that tingle before COVID. Right. There was this push with customer success. I think customer success has had an incredible runway. I believe that we're an industry that has been building the plane as we're headed to flight, maybe in flight, constantly evolving, constantly changing. And COVID changed everything. I think we didn't understand mental health directly influences productivity in the way that we understand it now. And instead, the financial fallout and the mental health fallout from COVID has shifted the focus into almost a desperate attempt to cling to customers and focus on our customer relationships. And in the fallout or the wake of that, we have lost touch with our need to prioritize employee mental health.
Suzy, Maria, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to just echo Jenelle, the movement to people-centered culture, whether it was supporting your teams that are supporting customers, whether it's just supporting your back office teams, was already afoot, but not really well understood or well adopted and looked at with great skepticism. And then the pandemic accelerated that need to understand that what we needed to do the most was take care of our people. And we've heard that mantra for a long time, but it wasn't made real in the financials, in the bottom line for most companies until the pandemic. And so we're moving into this new paradigm of leadership, this new paradigm of customer care, this much more human-centered workplace. And you all have probably noticed that the conversation about mental health was never had in the workplace before. And, according to some data from Business Solver, they do a state of workplace empathy report every year. Their 2024 report was their 9th report. And in it, 55% of CEOs admitted to having mental health challenges the last year, 45% of HR professionals, and 50% of employees. And those numbers have gone up. And I would submit to you that it's not because it wasn't happening before, but we didn't admit it before. And so now we're really understanding that mental health has an impact on our engagement, on our ability to innovate, on our ability to collaborate, and all of the good things that enable revenue to follow.
Yeah.
I
think that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Suzy.
No, I just want to add, we're talking a lot about like us as teams and leaders, but let's also recognize that with the pandemic, there's that shift that our customers now, no matter what industry we're in, no matter who we're serving or how we're serving, customers want more. They want it faster. They want it personalized. They want more. And so that's part of this picture, if you will, as well.
I also think what's also part of this picture is the customer is always right. And one of the business leaders that I follow is Richard Branson. And Richard Branson famously said, the customer clients do not come first, employees come first. And if you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of your clients. And I've always believed that. So there are some corners, there's some pockets out there where, there's some understanding, but you know, in most cases, and I have my own personal experiences with leaders that are like, revenue cures all ills. No, it doesn't actually.
Mm-mm.
I think mental health too, we've had an approach that is reactive. So when a crisis occurs in an employee life, we hope that we have resources to send them to a therapist or to give them a short-term leave of absence. I think now we're understanding mental health has to be a proactive approach, because without mental health, without prioritizing the things that we need as human beings,
Mhm.
we are lacking. We are approaching burnout, and burnout is a topic that's being talked about more now than ever. So I think also the fallout of what we're talking about is helping us as leaders and as organizations understand that the reactive approach is what has led to the problems we face today. And now we have to face a bigger issue, which is, okay, if we're going to prioritize mental health and be proactive, where do we start? How do we begin? What are quick wins that we can grab onto that are going to make an impact in our teams?
And what's so frustrating to me is that this reactivity that leads to the burnout, the root of it in a lot of cases, at least in my experience, is because we didn't freaking deal with the root cause of the problem to begin with. I had tremendous frustration, one of my last jobs before I started my own company, with this just refusal by the C-suite, the others in the C-suite, and my peer executives to not address the root cause of the problems that were affecting the ability of my team in the post-sale side of the business to be effective and efficient, and and create situations because of a lack of action that required us to firefight. And while they loved the fact that the team firefought very well and were able to contain a lot of problems, the result of that were people burning out. And so I'm losing the top 10, 15% of my staff, not the bottom 10, 15% of my staff, which I want to kind of cycle out of the organization anyways. And it came down to this refusal to admit that, hey, we got a problem. Right, the first step is admitting when you got a problem, and then actually doing something about it. Because everybody was focused on, well, we'll just bring in more revenue. That's the problem. We're playing a long game here, and so all you're doing by bringing in more revenue is making the ability of the post-sales team to drive customer lifetime value that much harder, because we're spread that much more thin, because we're dealing with a bunch of bullshit that we probably could have avoided by fixing things in the first place.
Yeah.
So in your experience leading customer success teams or working with customer facing teams, and you just touched on this, Jenelle, what are some of those behaviors that emerged that were the earliest indicators that somebody might be struggling with stress or burnout?
I mean, I did a keynote at CS 100, Andrew, where we spent some time together focusing on empathetic leadership in remote teams, and I highlighted some of the early warning signs that you have an employee who has burned out. Right, those are basics like decreased communication, meaning they sit back, their body language in team meetings is disconnected. There's a decline in their work quality. Maybe their emails are not as robust, or maybe they're not as quick to enter notes, or maybe their QBRs are not as detailed, right? And you're noticing that shift.
Or they use the F word more often than they normally
Well, there's
right?
that too. Yeah. But I
There's
mean,
that.
people who are burned out and not engaged, they take more time off. That costs you
Yes.
money. They call in sick more often. That costs you money. They're not as apt to, especially with remote employees, you think about accountability and making sure that they do their work. They're logging on later. They're not as quick to respond during the day, and they log off sooner. So they're actually costing you more money in the long run, because that disengaged employee is just at burnout and they can't give you 100%, or they're working in a toxic environment and they don't want to give you 100%.
Right. And that's probably filtering down to your customers as well.
100%.
Suzy, have you ever had a situation where somebody was kind of burning out on you, and that kind of manifested itself maybe in the way that they were working with or communicating with customers or just folks internally?
I appreciate that Jenelle said, how folks are showing up, because I agree. Like, are they turning their camera on? Is somebody that used to log on 5 minutes early to chit chat now showing up 2 minutes late. Like that is a huge, huge red flag. And these are things where we can provide intervention there. We can do things there. But absolutely, I read something recently, it was a Harvard Business Review, but like 80% of employee burnout cases stem from things like unrealistic expectations. So there's that workload that you were talking about earlier, Andrew, or poor team dynamics, i.e., I'm logging on 2 minutes late. I'm not turning my camera on, and nobody says anything because nobody cares.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's this idea that we're starting to look at these things that used to be considered fluff. And the smart companies are starting to invest, especially companies that had to maybe do some significant layoffs. They've got minimal resources now. They better make sure that every one of those resources, every one of those people is operating at full capacity. And so now they are starting to invest in, okay, well, what are some ways I can create empathy and create well-being in the workplace? Some of the obvious ones are things like employee assistance programs, or ensuring, leaders are doing their one-to-ones with people, doing some sort of communication training, empathy training, things like that with the team. But they're starting to put more of an investment in understanding that I've got to shore this up before it becomes a problem. And now I'm not saying everyone's doing that, but the smart companies are, because they're realizing that it actually has downstream bottom line impact. And if you look at the data, you were talking earlier, Andrew, about companies that have gotten it for a long time, companies like Southwest, where Herb Kelleher famously said, happy employees mean happy customers. And we can replace happy with mental well-being, with integrated work life, all of those things. But when you look at, to the point I think Suzy made earlier about what do customers want, every company is more transparent now. And so when you look at customers that say 86% of them say that empathy is the most important driver of loyalty. So if they're being treated well by customer support, by customer success, if that person is really engaging with them and seeking to understand and doing active listening versus trying to crank through calls because of the metrics you talked about earlier. And there's another statistic, 97% of customers say that empathy is the most important element in customer engagement, even if their problem is not solved. That's huge for customer retention. So you can imagine the combustion that happens if you combine an employee who's disengaged on the phone or online with a customer who's expecting empathy, or they're going to go to your competitor. It's just a horrible combination. It just doesn't mix.
And I talk all the time about the two most important superpowers that people in customer success roles possess, and that's empathy and active listening. And so you've got this, it's like this perfect storm of people who are typically have higher EQ and some self-awareness, and and so when they're not being valued, they're not being treated well, they're not being, there's no programs to help them cope with this stuff. It's even more combustible. So how do you, in those situations, how do you approach conversations about mental health and well-being with your team members, right? And what kind of challenges have you encountered in making those types of discussions productive and comfortable?
Well, I'm going to say right off the bat that I think we have to remove the stigma that mental health conversations are personal, therefore they don't belong in the workplace. Feelings, emotions are always personal. And if you're having a conversation with another human being and you're feeling, it's personal. And and emotional intelligence, right, kind of where my niche is here. I think a lot of people think that talking about feelings or being vulnerable is sitting around in a circle, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, talking about feelings.
Kumbaya. Yeah.
That is not what we're talking about. This is very simply, when you have an employee who's struggling and they're struggling, it's an open door to say, look, I've seen you kind of pull back. I noticed that you're attending calls a little bit later than normal. So help me understand what's going on. Do I need the nitty gritty about what happened in your life and the details of the drama and why you're struggling so much? Probably not. But do I need to understand that you are limited from a mental capacity standpoint to do your job really well because of what you're going through? Yes, because
Mhm.
then I can identify, how can I help you? Do you need to have a different work schedule? Do I need to offload a couple accounts to increase your, like, what do you need to feel successful? And have that open, honest conversation without fear. And Andrew, I think you kind of touched on this earlier, but this removing the stigma of fear around vulnerability and feelings or emotions at work is one of the biggest things I think we have to overcome right now, because I think that's what keeps a lot of leaders and organizations from leaning into this topic,
Mhm.
because the quote that, hey, it's not it's not personal, it's just business,
It's
that's not
bullshit. It
true
is
when it comes
personal.
to
It's
Mhm.
personal.
right,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
personal for your employees, but it's also the other thing that you got to remember is it's personal for your customers as well. If you're doing it right, you're taking that into account as well.
Mhm.
I used to promote all the time. I used to tell my team, hey, you know what? I understand customer facing roles. You're on the front lines. You need a mental health day. You take that mental health day. You just tell me, right?
Yeah.
You need that break. I want you to take that break. That's more important to me than trying to squeeze another 8 hours out of productivity out of you. I used to insist that my team take long weekends or entire weeks after we completed long projects. I'm like, no, you need to go take a break. I'm going to push you to take a break.
Mhm.
You've got to, and by the way, you all need, and for all the leaders on this call, where most of them are leaders, you've got to tell that same thing to your team on a
Mhm.
daily basis. I sign off every webinar, every time I do a coaching session, a training session, I sign off with, go spend some time away from the freaking computer and your customers and your company today. Go out to lunch, go take a walk, go do some yoga, some meditation,
Mhm.
walk away from this. You need the break. And that's
Mhm.
something that you should be reminding your team members every single day. They need that break.
There's the reminder aspect, but there's the modeling aspect too, which Andrew, I think you do very well as well. But I think that's the point, is we've got a lot of leaders out there who are like reading a book or listening to a
This type
webinar,
of
and
modeling, this type of
they're going to
modeling.
go, yeah, that kind of modeling. They go back and they say, and they just make a pronouncement, and yet they are working 11-hour days. They don't
Yeah.
take their paid time off. They don't invest in their own mental health. Your actions are going to speak louder than your words. And so if we can have leaders that say, hey, this is what I'm doing. You don't have to be vulnerable about everything you're doing in your life. If you don't want to share that you're in therapy, don't share that you're in therapy. But a lot of successful people are in therapy. And
Should
so,
be in
whatever,
therapy.
whatever you can do to model it for your people, because even if you say it, if you're not doing it, people won't feel like they can be successful there. And I just want to share a quick story about this, because I started the Empathy Edge, my previous book about empathy, which was the business case for empathy, with a story of a woman who started a collection agency, which, probably the hardest work there is for people to be on the phone, calling people, asking them to pay their bills, and having all kinds of conversations. And she started her own collection agency because she had worked at one when she was 18. And the first day she was there, she, was dealing with her colleagues, and she was talking to them before they got started. And she was like, oh, these are all really lovely people. And then they all got on the phone and started making calls to customers, and they turned into people she didn't recognize 15 minutes before. And so in her mind, she was like, there's got to be a better way to do this, because their success rates, their collection rates are so low as an industry. So she started her own collection agency where the primary focus for her was employee well-being. These people are making difficult calls. They're calling people in their worst possible moments. It's often they're doing it on behalf of medical organizations where, it's medical bills that haven't been paid. And so she did everything she could to put training programs and support in for her people. The result of that was that her collection rates were 4 times the industry average, because she
Wow.
started them off with making sure their capacity was full before they got on the phone, and that their first job was to gain trust from the people they were calling. Not necessarily the first call equals they pay the bill. The first call was to establish trust. And she gave them lots of opportunities to take breaks, lots of opportunities to have coaching circles and debriefs. And it resulted in bottom line impact. And we need to highlight more stories like that to say, what are you doing within your teams to be able to ignite them to create these customer connections? They used to get invited to people's weddings, people that they were collecting debt from. So it was crazy, the connection they were able to have and the financial success they were able to have, simply because she said, I'm going to approach this in a way no one else in the industry is approaching it.
Brilliant.
Hey, just a reminder, folks, you have questions, drop those in the Q&A.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I accidentally dismissed someone's question that I meant to answer live. So I just want to say,
so I'm gonna
Alexis,
put that
I
back
see
here,
you.
but
Yeah.
we'll answer those. I'll put
Yeah.
that back. But
I have it as
we'll,
answered. It wasn't answered.
Yeah. So
Sorry, Alexis.
That's okay. We'll make sure to ask Alexis question when we get to that. So let's kind of piggyback on that story. Do anybody have a instance where you had to balance meeting customer expectations with protecting your team's well-being? And what did you learn from that experience? Yeah, and I've got one to kick it off. I was at Intact, which was a early stage SaaS company in the accounting business, and I walked in the office one morning. This is about 3 months after I joined, as the head of post sales, and my support team. We all sat in the same area. My support team was Rochambeauing in the middle of the aisle, and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, this person from this customer is on the phone, is on chat, and she's horrible to deal with. She's an absolutely nasty person." And so we Rochambeau on who's going to take her. And so I kind of dug into this and realized that this person was just, I mean, verbally abusive, both on the few phone calls she made, but also just really nasty person in general. And that was, I was really concerned about that. I talked about it earlier in our pre-call that I always felt, my role as a leader was to be the shit shield, right? To protect my team, to give them the tools they needed to be successful. And that included the space, as well as not allowing bullies to impact them. And what ended up happening is I brought this to the rest of the executive staff. This wasn't a tiny company. It wasn't a huge company for ours. But I said, this is not good for my employees' well-being, mental health, and I want to divorce this customer. And I want to let you know that I'm going to be having this conversation. So I picked up the phone after I got the okay from the rest of the executive staff, and I justified it, and I showed them data and all this stuff. So they agreed that it made sense. I got on a phone call with the key stakeholder, and I laid out the entire situation. And said, we're prepared to walk away. We're prepared to walk away from our business, and we will make it as easy as possible for you to extract your data, but we can no longer move forward if our key point of contact is this person. And we never heard from that person again. We ended up keeping the customer. I don't know what happened to that individual, if they got moved out of the organization or they got put into a different role. But for me, it was more important that my team did not have to get up and freaking Rochambeau in the middle of the aisle every time this customer popped up.
Yeah. The showing the advocacy, that's the walking the talk. If we're going to say that our values are respect and empathy and that we care about you and your success, then being an advocate when things get to that point, you've tried everything. That is such a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Suzy, Jenelle, either you have an example in your teams that you've managed where you've had something similar to that?
I'm going to leave the organization nameless, but there was a really great idea to block off Wednesdays for internal meetings. So entire company had Wednesdays blocked off, and the idea obviously was that you were not to schedule meetings on Wednesday, and this allowed everybody to catch up on Wednesdays. And anybody in CS knows this is particularly important, right? For entering in notes and getting those QBR decks ready and doing all the admin things that need to be done before you're firefighting. Well, unfortunately, at said organization, the culture just kind of bled into everybody disrespected this Wednesday thing. And even though you would look at somebody's internal calendar and see Wednesday blocked off, you'd still schedule right over it. And so the solution here, and it's probably a solution to a lot of these things, is to speak up and take action and push back. My team cannot make this because it's on a Wednesday, and none of us are supposed to be doing internal meetings on Wednesdays. I loved earlier when we talked about like modeling well-being. That's, hey, if you're going to therapy and you feel comfortable with it, title that on your calendar that you're going to therapy. Don't just block it off and say do not schedule. Like, you can model that behavior and save that space as well. So I guess in short, TLDR, speak up. Speak up. If there's a great practice in place like that, but it's being totally ignored, speak up.
Mm-hmm.
One of my examples that I'm using a lot right now is a little bit of a different take on how we as leaders have to be responsible for protecting our team. Because Andrew, I love the way you put that. I think in customer success specifically, because we are relationship and people driven, we often hit a ceiling or a wall with executives and leadership to get the tools that we need, right? And I think there's one big aspect of that, and it's because we're not speaking the language of our leadership. We speak in relationships, conversations, engagement touch points, customer journeys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But our leadership doesn't need to hear that. Our leadership wants to hear numbers, money, impact, ARR, churn, right? We're not speaking the language to say, here's all the data, here's what I need. And so to be an advocate for your team means when something goes, so I'll give you an example. When a marketing team launches to a customer, hey, a new product is coming, new feature being released in Q1 to the customers. And now my team is getting inquiries of like, well, we can't wait to hear about it. What do you know? And the CS team hasn't even been informed that the
Right.
customer has been notified of that feature, right?
That's never happened.
Right. Okay. So what do you as the leader do about that? You can either kick it to your team and be like, it's not our fault. Our leadership kind of screwed us. We just are going to have to deal with it. Do the best you can. That's not really helping your employees feel confident in the company, confident in your leadership, or confident that they can build those customer relationships with an educated, informed perspective. Instead, I ask myself, okay, I can't point the finger all the time. I can't continually throw other people under the bus. I have to take accountability for what does my leadership team know from me and my team that could potentially change the trajectory or the relationship so that this doesn't happen in the future. I'm someone who's constantly asking, how can I do better? And it's not necessarily casting blame. It's owning up to how can I increase my leadership's awareness of what my team needs? And am I speaking in a term or a language that they're going to understand and listen?
Well, I think that's a great bridge to my next question, right? Which is what methods have proven most effective in identifying and addressing those potential stress points before they become critical issues? Any specific methods that you've used? I mean, I've used data-driven storytelling. For example, we had one of these issues where my team had to end up doing a bunch of free work because something was broken with the product. And so I sat down and did an analysis and asked my team to do some time tracking on how much time they were putting into this effort, and then went to engineering and said, what's it going to take to fix this? And I got an estimate from engineering, which I padded, and then I went to my CFO and I said, look at all this free work we're doing, right? That's causing my team that much more stress and effort to get these customers to where they want to go, and yet look at how much it's going to take to actually fix it once and for all for engineering. And it was so out of whack. Then I was able to enlist the help of my CFO to hit my product leader and say, you got to fix this.
I mean,
any other tools, any other methods that you've used to
I think role shadowing is huge. I think a lot of the time there's disconnect because we don't understand, like from a customer's perspective, I don't know what my product guys do every day. I don't know the lift and the time and the mental energy that goes into what they do. And so when I'm coaching leadership, I often say a day. Every quarter, someone spends a day shadowing a different department, because that's a really great way to build empathy. And I'm sure, Maria, you have stuff to add to this too.
Being in the trenches is one of the habits of how you
think it should
strengthen
be
your
a
empathy.
requirement.
Yeah,
I love that. Getting the CEO, getting the VP of product, VP of marketing and sales to sit in on these calls that people are having, these conversations. What about you, Suzy? Anything Any methods that you've shown to be effective when you're dealing with this sort of stuff?
There's functionality. I know Lattice has it, and probably a lot of the softwares have it. But it's for like check-ins, weekly check-ins. There's a functionality that will allow you to. Have you ever been in a doctor's office and how are you feeling? And it's the sad face to the super happy face, and then there's something in between. Well, that's one of them on the check-ins. And again, I don't think this is exclusive to Lattice. But it's a really quick 2 second at the end of my week when I'm saying what my wins and my losses were to say what my mood is. And then I can even look at the mood, or manager can look at the mood and see how it has ebbed and flowed. And maybe it's seasonal. For example, I work in human resources. I know that October and November, it's going to be nutty, and I'm probably going to have more frustrated faces than super happy faces. But that allows us not only to self-coach our own moods, and help us, match the tools to the moods, but then also it helps us share with those above us because gripes go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a really low tech solution to building more of those relationships with your team and getting them to feel comfortable and safe to open up when they need to is designing your meetings, whether they're one-to-ones, whether they're larger meetings. Design the meeting with a built-in entry ramp, not just jumping right into business, but doing a check-in. And if that's uncomfortable for you to sit down with someone and go, so how are things going generally? How do you think things are going? What's going on for you? What did you do this weekend? Showing care in them as a person can go a long way. And one of the people I interviewed for the first empathy book, The Empathy Edge, who ran a global nonprofit, every Monday staff meeting started with a built-in 15 to 20 minutes of everyone going around and saying where they were and what they were bringing into the meeting. So it could be, I did this, I had this awesome trip this weekend with my family, or I got no sleep this weekend because I was potty training my 2-year-old, right? And what it did was it gave everyone a grounding of understanding where everyone was in the process, sharing a little bit about their own lives as much as they were comfortable. But then now I know when I present information, if I'm going to get someone in front of a customer, I know where they're coming from. I understand their context, right? So Andrew, if you had no sleep this weekend because of potty training, and I have some brilliant idea that's going to cause you more work, you're going to be really defensive about it. You're going to come at me. But now I know. And so we can have these conversations being a little bit more open and getting to know each other. We don't have to all be best friends, but building in that time at the beginning of meetings where you're not just getting right down to business, and also building in pockets in your day between meetings, like not just rolling from meeting to meeting to meeting. Our brains can't keep up.
Yeah.
Our emotions can't keep up, right? And so if you really want the most out of your people, it's less meetings, more space, and a little bit more time. And that's something that you can start implementing right away.
If I did not sleep all weekend because I was potty training, I'd feel really shitty. So sorry, bad dad joke. So next question, and I'm going to direct this at you, Maria, specifically to start, because you probably cover it in this book. How have you adapted your leadership approach, or what recommendations do you have for folks on the call? How to adapt their leadership approach to create that psychological safety within the team while maintaining kind of the high performance standards that people in customer facing roles demand?
I think the biggest piece of the balance is that you have to have your own capacity and your own house in order before you can help someone else that might be having mental health challenges or is burning out or is frustrated, because you can't show up in the conversation with room in your head for their perspective, for their point of view. It's going to be seen as a problem. You're going to be defensive. You're going to be fearful. You're going to meet any other challenge from a place of, this is really inconvenient for me, right? And so the thing that I've learned over the years, and I've worked with executive teams where I've had to come into kind of a hostile environment. And I was just able to have my grounding, have my self-confidence, do whatever I needed to do to be mindful and in the moment, to be able to give them space to vent, give them space to talk, Give them space to be heard, because half the time that someone's having an issue or they're having a mental health crisis, it's because they don't feel heard. And so being able to just say, I'm going to take it without judgment, whatever you have to say. I'm not going to jump in about why you're wrong and I'm right. I think that pause is so important, that thoughtful pause of like, no, I am really listening, and I'm not just pausing to listen so that I can respond about how stupid that sounds. Like, I'm actually going to listen to you and I'm going to reflect back what you're saying. And that, for someone who speaks very interactively, as I think we all do on this call, that can be challenging sometimes. And I call it my inner shusher, of just shushing myself, let the person talk. And especially if it's a contentious situation. By the way, this applies to if you're having a customer success call with a hostile customer. Take a breath, take a moment,
Two
just let
ears,
them
one mouth.
vent. Exactly. Just let them vent for a moment. And it's not about, you don't have to instantly go into problem solving, but just validating, like, wow, that sounds really tough.
Which
Wow,
is a very men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing. I
very
remember
much.
reading that
And
book, and it was like, hey, well, we're going to solve the problem.
well,
Right.
but that's, that's a
But in
trope.
general,
That's a trope, because the
yeah,
problem in my
exactly.
marriage is I do that to my husband when he's venting, is I am like, go do this, go talk to this person, go da 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 da. And he's like, I just want to be heard. And when you hear someone, when you take that moment to have that pause, whether it's with an angry customer or whether it's someone on your team who's in crisis, it does two things. One, they feel heard. But two, it lowers the temperature in the room, that like, now I don't have to fight so hard to be heard. So I'm going to be a little bit more open. And the three magic words when you're having those conversations is tell me more.
Right.
Get them to talk again. Get them to talk further. Get them to talk until they're exhausted and they feel heard. And then you can go in with solutions. Yeah. The offloading, and then go in with solutions, go in with what can we do about this? And that's why, to the stat I mentioned earlier about, 97% of customers talking about empathy being important. Again, it was even if their problem wasn't solved, they just had a positive impression of the company and the brand, that they at least get me. They at least understand me. They're doing everything they can to help me, but I believe them now. I have trust because they've heard me out. And so I think we try to make the earning trust thing so complicated. And it's really just about, if you feel seen, heard, and valued, you are going to trust that person. And if that person is transparent about decisions, about their own strengths, their own weaknesses, that builds trust too. And then you can have a more productive conversation moving forward. It doesn't mean you have to relinquish your boundaries. It doesn't mean you have to just lay down and die because the customer's always right. To your point earlier, it just means now we can get to a place where we're engaging our frontal lobe and our executive skills, and we can have a decent conversation.
The key is just shutting up and listening. Right. We talk about that in dealing with difficult customers, right? One of the first things we like, just shut up and listen, let them go through that offloading process. That in itself will diffuse a volatile situation. Jenelle, what about you? Have you, what have you done to kind of adapted your leadership approach?
I think a huge word that's been tossed around a couple times today from our audience is fear, right? So there's a lot of internal dialogue for all of us, and a lot of people call this imposter syndrome, this voice that tells you you're not good enough, I'm under scrutiny, I'm going to lose my job, I'm being heavily measured. And so when those thoughts are happening and you're a leader and you go into a meeting like this, like Maria says, and you're listening, well, what happens if that employee is giving you nothing but negative feedback? You might take it personally, or the way they're coming at you triggers you because that's how your dad used to yell at you when you were a kid. And now all of a sudden your filter has completely been skewed. And so I just want to call out that when you allow fear to cloud your perspective or how you're taking in someone else's opinions or feedback, you're taking it personal, then you're missing the point of the conversation in the first place. And so I think it's really important as leadership that you check your emotions before you go into that call. You check, hey, is there anything that's bugging me? Maybe my husband and I got in a fight this morning and I'm already overly sensitive. don't come into that meeting thinking that, well, I'm the leader and I have to have it all together and I have to have all the answers. And if I give sway or if I become vulnerable, I might put myself or my employee at risk. When you allow fear to lead you, it's never a good outcome for you or anyone else in that circumstance. So
So I
I've
got
been
to tell
really
you,
mindful of my own insecurities coming out to ask for open, honest, vulnerable conversation, that I'm not taking any of their feedback personally or victimizing myself or taking it as an attack.
so I got to tell you, when you said that, when you made that comment about that's how my dad used to yell at me when I mean, that I
Mhm.
have literally had that. Like, oh my God, this person
Mhm.
sounds like my dad when he was at his dickish moments,
Mhm.
right? And so, and yes, self-awareness, self-control, important part of EQ,
So
but
important.
it's still, I totally can relate, and it's sometimes really hard.
Yeah.
I even
We're
have those
constantly,
situations with Todd, my partner, when he like comes down on me on something. I'm like, fuck, you sound like my dad, and it takes
Mhm.
all of my willpower to
Mhm.
not just sit there and kind of
But
sleep
you
back in the
recognize, Andrew,
corner.
the thing is, that about
Yeah,
yourself. You've
Yes.
recognized that. And that sometimes is the hardest part, is to recognize, okay, I have an emotional trigger around this. Well,
Mhm.
why? Why am I
yeah,
being emotionally triggered when they're not my dad? They don't know my history, right? So it's that introspective mindfulness of your own state of mind and your own emotions on a
yeah.
regular basis to avoid miscommunication or misunderstanding.
Love that. Susie, anything to add before I mean, we're only got a few questions, but we're also running out of time. So I would like to get to the questions that folks have posed. So Susie, anything to add on this one?
Hey, I just want to remind people to remember that there are tools, maybe tools at the employer that can help, like EAP or well-being or whatnot, or tools in someone's community. So as the leader, you don't necessarily, obviously, everything Maria and Jenelle said, plus one, plus a million, but
Right.
also remember there are other tools that you can point
Mhm.
people towards. You don't necessarily have to be that person for everyone on your team.
Yeah.
But
Can I
one of
just
the
quickly
tools,
add? I was just going
sorry,
to
go ahead,
quickly add,
Maria.
Susie, because I'm so glad you brought that up, because we were talking earlier about the new leadership paradigm does not require you to be your employee's therapist. Like that's what people are taking away from this. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not what's happening here. We're just asking you to recognize the whole person, recognize that you don't check your humanity at the door when you come into work, and that whatever's going on for you personally or economically or politically or socially is actually impacting, Bob's ability to do an accurate financial spreadsheet. Like it's causation, right? And so to your point, we don't have to solve all our employees' personal problems. We're just saying take an interest. We're saying, and I love that you said use the tools, because again, you don't have to be the person to solve it. They're just looking to be supported. And so if there's other resources and other places you can recommend or refer, or you to get your own help of like, hey, I'm dealing with an employee that's dealing with this right now. Do we need to bring in a trainer to help with conflict resolution? Do we need to bring in a counselor? Do we need to bring in a new benefit in our EAP program? Look for those solutions, but it doesn't mean that they don't have to be talking to you about, their boundaries with their in-laws, as I was saying earlier. Like they don't pay you for that. They pay you to accomplish revenue goals. Like that's why you're there. Don't lose sight of the goals and the rest of the team, but leverage your tools. I'm so glad you said that.
And by the way, just a reminder, I mentioned this earlier, tools could also mean, oh my God, go out and have lunch. Go take a walk around the block.
Mm-hmm.
Go meditate. Go take a break in the middle of the day. If you're
Mm-hmm.
working in the office, tell people don't sit at your freaking desk and work. Walk, get away from this. That in
Mm-hmm.
itself is a tool, right? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a formal employee assistance program to say, you need to walk away from this in the
Right.
middle of the day and give yourself a mental and emotional break.
Yeah.
All right, let's ask some questions from the audience. We're going to start with the one that Maria so flippantly dismissed.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. Alexa, thank you. Alexis, thank you
I
for your.
clicked a button and there was no undo. So
That's okay. So my assumption is you want to answer that. You want to jump in on this. So
well,
um,
I think I double clicked on something
yeah.
to
So
say,
so
yeah,
Alexis asks. Thank you, Alexis, for joining us, and thanks for the question. How
yes,
do you handle it when an employee has multiple personal issues?
yeah.
When one problem is solved, another issue appears.
So this is perfect because it's piggybacking off what I just said and what Suzy just said. And again,
Sounds like life with my
you're not
15-year-old daughter.
you're not there to be their therapist. And one of the stories I tell in the new book was about a leader who's a very empathetic leader who was constantly dealing with an underperforming employee who initially said they were having some mental health challenges and took leave, but was underperforming before that. And then when they came back, they continued to underperform. And she sort of did everything in her power to try to support this person. And if it wasn't one thing, it was another, it was another, it was another. And what she had to do was sort of get back to, again, I care about you. She tried to have meetings with the person didn't show up. They tried to renegotiate work schedules. It was putting a strain on the rest of the team. So in her goal to be empathetic to this one employee, she was being unempathetic to the rest of the team. And it was because she was trying to solve their problems, which were one after the other. So it got to the point where it was like just a very confident and kind conversation. This is the work we need done. This is what's not happening. And we understand you are having these challenges, you're having these whatever, but then now we need to talk about you moving into a different role or moving on because we have work we need to produce. We have goals we need to achieve. And that might sound kind of harsh, but you can say that in a very kind way and just remind people that again, it could be a misalignment for them at whatever point they're in their life. And if you can have that kind, confident conversation without, with boundaries and without, falling back on, I have to save this person, then you can actually have a much more productive conversation. And in hindsight, many of those people will say, thank you for that, because this wasn't the right role for me. This wasn't the right place for me. But you're not required as the leader to solve one personal problem after another, if that helps answer the question. And
Suzy, anything
yeah.
to add? Suzy, anything to add?
I think Maria nailed it.
Jenelle?
I would just say, as an employee who has gone through personal crisis, when you're in personal crisis and it's one crisis to another, it's difficult to communicate what you need. And so I think if you're a leader who's dealing with someone who's going through those personal crises, remember that they might not be able to communicate effectively what they need. And so to be a problem solver, to be creative and ask the right questions to get the answers of what does that employee need from you and from the company to do the work that's required. So just throwing out there that from an empathetic perspective, to Maria's point, don't let that employee drag you off track or drag the team off track, but don't assume that because they're not being that communicative, that that's the answer. Sometimes we have to go above and beyond with extreme circumstances or extreme things that people are going through to try and help get them back on track.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis. Appreciate you joining us and for that question. And by the way, just a reminder, folks, we're going to go until 1:15. So if you can stick around, we're going to answer the rest of these questions, hopefully. Our next question comes from Ola. Ola, good to see you. Another frequent listener to this program. Ola asks, how can managers identify signs of burnout or mental health struggles in their teams in remote work environments? And Jenelle, looks like you want to jump in on this one first. What have you got for Ola on this one?
Yeah, I think in order to identify what's going wrong, you need a baseline. I think sometimes we hold standards to each employee differently, where if the employee doesn't know what they're expected to do, if you don't have a baseline of operations or expectations, it's difficult to address those signs. So I talked about those signs earlier: lack of communication, physical body language when you're on video and you've got somebody who's leaned in and engaging versus somebody who's nodding along and sitting back. Those are signs, but I think those signs are more recognizable when you've established the baseline of expectations that everybody on the team is supposed to adhere to. So just kind of
so like everybody needs to have their camera on, everybody needs to be that sort of thing.
I think so, yes. And I think when it comes to communication and, hey, if everybody's supposed to check in on Friday with a quick update and you have an employee who's lagging on a regular basis, right? That's an expectation that you're seeing that's indicating something's going on with that employee. So again, uncommunicated expectations are sometimes the primary drivers of the biggest issues. So if you can remove the guesswork and if you can adhere to a standard that everybody is aware of, those warning signs are going to be way more obvious right out of the gate.
Awesome. Suzy, Maria, anything to add?
I agree with just the behaviors and the mannerisms, and making sure people know what is expected of them. I think that absolutely nails it, because that's the part that a lot of organizations miss. And in a remote environment, we're all when we're engaged, we're all looking for connection. So providing those opportunities for connection, maybe even some for fun connection, right? Like maybe it's a Slack channel, or it's
So
a
important.
water cooler for 15 minutes on Fridays. Provide opportunities to connect.
Yeah, 2 of the 5 pillars are clarity and joy. And clarity hit your point about stop making assumptions and clarify and articulate every expectation. Many leaders, again, assume empathy is crying on the floor with your employees. But empathy is also clear expectations, because you can't hold someone accountable for an expectation you never set. It's career progression maps. It's, it's constant transparent communication. It's soliciting input. It's all of those things are also examples of empathetic leadership, that if you're a more cerebral person and not as emotional, you can access your cognitive empathy versus your emotional empathy.
Well, emotional empathy is sympathy.
No,
right?
it's not. Nope.
Oh, it's
2
not?
separate things completely.
Okay.
Sympathy is more based on a negative feeling, on sadness or pity. When you're feeling something for someone, empathy is when you're feeling with someone. You are on the same side of the table.
If you're on the floor crying along with is that sympathy or is that emotional empathy?
That's just being there for them. I mean, you don't have to be crying, but the point is, it doesn't always have to be accessed from the emotional. It can be accessed from the cognitive. If you're an analytical left brain thinker, it's about what might things be like for them. I'm using my head. What might they be going through? What questions might they have? What support might they need? I'm using my head to do that. Emotional empathy is you're upset and anxious and my palms start to sweat. I start getting worked up. My heartbeat starts beating faster. I'm in it with you because I've felt something similar. We can have both of those things that lead to compassion. And compassion is an action. So an action could be active listening. An action could be take the day off. An action could be, oh, I really like your input. I'm going to incorporate that into the strategy going forward. All of those are examples of action. But that idea of really of embracing that you can be there for them with your head as much as your heart, I think is really important for people that can't access that feeling empathy as easily as others.
Well, and I'm going to add to that, Marie, and say empathy. I have heard a lot of people say that empathy is like, I know exactly what you're going through. I went through a divorce. It was really difficult. No, you don't. You will never understand what someone else goes through. However, if you have an employee who's really, let's say, betrayed or hurt or angry, can you empathize with those emotions? Yes, you can understand and say, man, I know what it's like to feel betrayed. I know what it's like to be so outraged and so burned out. You don't really know where to go. You can empathize with any emotion your employee expresses because you've felt that emotion at some point in your life. So don't say that you cannot be empathetic. You can. It's very simply identifying the emotion someone feels. You've felt it too. And you can empathize with that person by saying, I know what it feels like to be frustrated. I know what it feels like to be angry. It's very simple.
But you don't know what they're feeling because that's them. That's their voice.
Well, that's why listening is so important. So you have to ask. You have to find, you don't want to guess at what their context is. You have to ask questions and you have to listen and understand what they're talking about and what their context is. What Jenelle is describing is something I've coined the term empathy hijacking, which is when we try to connect with someone by all of a sudden talking about our own experience.
Yes.
And that moves the narrative from them and what they need to what you're going to impart.
Yeah. And I think it's really important the way that you worded that, Jenelle. I've felt like that before. Not I know what you're feeling, because I don't, because I'm not in your head. Right. But I've had that type, and I'm sorry that you're going through that.
That's right.
Right. It's a lot of it has to do with the words that you select.
Yes.
Right. And how you communicate with them.
100%.
Ola, thank you for the question. And Janelle, if you can hit done on there. So here's an interesting counter question to that. We talked about dealing with people who are remote. What advice do you all have for those facing the stress of forced return to office by leaders who say collaboration only happens in the office, keeping in mind that moving, commuting, less family time, and layoffs are components of that stress? Thank you, Michael, for this question. What have you all got to say about that? Anything?
Look, I've got
Wow, it's a suck it up and deal with it, Michael.
no, look, this is someone, I have 4 kids, three, all of them are in elementary school, triplets. Plus I work a full-time job and have aging parents. My company said it was an RTO. I think it's not a good fit. And I say that because I am going to set a very clear boundary and I prioritize my health. I don't want to retire on a big pile of money. I want to retire with my health. And so this is where you start to look and say, is it the best fit? And Michael brings up a great point, because if it's a good fit for you, but you know that stress is going to be on your team, what are the downfall from that as well?
I also think too, it can present as a problem. So I heard this talk from someone, and it's not Simon Sinek, but it's somebody else, that said, I look at life as W's and L's, wins and lessons, right? And so if you're faced with return to office, were you at an office before COVID? Chances are pretty good you were. And that commute time that seems stressful, my question to you is the job worth keeping? If the answer is yes, then how can you turn the commute time into listen to a book, do some work on your iPad, right? Find a reason to make it a positive experience for you. And the rest of that, look, I teach this, your thoughts create your emotions that drive your behavior. If you look at return to office as stressful, it's awful, I don't want to do it, I'm not going to make progress, my team's got whatever you're telling yourself, that's going to drive how you feel about the situation, that will ultimately drive your behavior. I'm challenging anyone who's returning to office and seeing it as a stressful moment to shift your perspective. Look at it through a different angle. How can it benefit you? How can it benefit your team? And to Suzy's point, if it's not a good fit for your lifestyle and what your needs are, obviously find something else. But if you don't have that option, or you really want to keep your job, change the way you're looking at the situation, how it's impacting you in a positive light, and watch the rest of your emotions and your behaviors follow suit. It's all about this and what you're thinking and how you're perceiving what's coming at you and life's unpredictability and uncertainty. You have a choice about the thoughts in your head, the things that you're thinking, and how that influences how you move through life. And so if you're overwhelmed by the negativity of returning to office and you need to keep your job, or you want to keep your job, change how you're viewing it. Shift your perspective, or look at it through a different angle.
I used to get on BART at Burlingame and take that into the city every day when I worked for Business Objects down on what was that, down on First Street?
Spear Street.
Spear Street on the Embarcadero. And it was about a 25-minute ride. And so what I would do is I'd get on BART and I'd throw my headphones in and I'd meditate and I'd have a 15-minute meditation routine. And I knew that once that routine was over, time to open my eyes, and I would be close to my stop. That was both to not only get myself in the right frame of mind in the morning, but also avoid the horrors of BART, which for anybody who's been on Bay Area, I know Maria can probably relate. The horrors of BART. That's how I avoided seeing some of that craziness. Michael, thank you for joining us as usual every time, and thanks for the question. All right, last question, and we're just about out of time, so it's perfect. And I think this is a great one to finish on. How can you safely speak up about, and this is from an anonymous attendee, how can you safely speak up about burnout without running the risk of being let go? The company I work for has had several layoffs and restructures, and people that had previously raised concerns about these changes creating burnout have all been let go. Personally, my first suggestion is don't mention it at this point to anybody in that organization, because they clearly look at that as a weakness. But any suggestions in general from any of you of how somebody in that type of situation could handle that?
I mean, I have two things to offer. And one is, kind of related to what Jenelle was saying, is that, and you may have proof of this, but also, they probably weren't let go just for bringing up burnout. Let's be realistic, right? There might have been other things going on where that team, that product line was gone, where they were actually a poor performer before. Like we don't really know. We tell ourselves a lot of narratives, and I've done it too. So I'm not casting stones, but that could be a false narrative you're telling yourself. The other thing I might invite you to do is, if you are seeing an impact on productivity, if you're seeing an impact on the bottom line, on customer experience because of the burnout, then that's the conversation you can have. You can maybe put together some data, or, to Janelle's point earlier about speaking the language of the executive team. This is why I wrote The Empathy Edge, was like, the moral imperative is not enough for people to be empathetic. So here's the business case. Here's the ROI. And that's what got people's attention. So if you have time and if you have access to the information to just, share a report, share an email, share a couple of slides with someone and say, look, I'm not complaining. I'd like to offer some solutions, but you need to be aware of this problem. You'll be seen as part of the solution versus part of the problem. The third thing I want to offer is, if you do something like that and you get let go for it, that's a culture problem.
Yeah.
And if again, not everybody's in a position where they can just get let go or go for another job, and I recognize that. But if it's possible, that doesn't sound like a very values-aligned company. If truly what's going on there is that people are getting let go because they're speaking out about burnout, first of all, that company's not going to be very sustainable for the long haul with that kind of leadership paradigm and that kind of culture. But also, is that really where you want to spend your years on this earth? Like, just to kind of put it bluntly, if you're able to go somewhere else, that might be an option if you exhaust some of these other suggestions. So just a few things that might help for that. And I'd love to hear from my co-panelists on that one.
Suzy, Janelle, anything to add?
I just want to echo what Maria, I love your suggestion to show up with a solution, right? And we know in general, even outside of this circumstance, whenever we want to push back, it's always better to show up with a solution. And I think that's a great lane to take with something like this.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of want to put this in a real situation. So Marie, if you're my boss and I'm approaching burnout and I need to tell you how I'm feeling, I'm stressed, I'm not getting my meetings done, customers aren't happy, I don't know what to do, I'm putting off the negative energy, I'm telling you that I'm burned out, I'm expecting you to care about my feelings and about my life and what I'm going through. That is a very difficult thing for you as a manager to go up to your leadership and say, well, Janelle's burned out and she doesn't have enough time, and these aren't things that are happening. Do you see what I'm saying? Versus if I come to Maria as my manager and I say, these are how many customers I have. This is how much time every day I'm spending on calls. And these are the customers that are not being helped because these are the priorities I've been given that I cannot complete. It's a different conversation. The energy level is different. The energy that your emotions are physical energy in your body that is felt and seen. And so when you come at it from an emotional perspective, you're missing what your manager or your leadership needs to hear from you from a productivity, financial impact perspective. So yes, burnout is real. Yes, feel the way you're feeling, but be mindful that how you present your level of burnout is going to make or break that conversation with your manager or with your company leadership.
Yeah, we used to, there was someone I used to work with at Business Objects, not directly, but they were infamous for whenever a new project was put on their plate to say, fabulous, I'd love to be part of this project. Here's the 16 things that are already on my plate. What would you like me to take off in order to take this project on? No emotion, no, but just, after the person took their jaw off the floor, it was a completely reasonable request. And, we only have so many hours in the day. So I
And if
love
you're going to
that.
talk about burnout, you better know why you're burned out, meaning know your
Yeah.
statistics, know your data, know your financial fallout. You as a CSM or as a leader must take accountability for what you're carrying from a weight perspective of the
Yes.
company's
Yes.
expectations and KPIs.
You need to be able
Amen.
to say no to things. I love that. We actually
Yeah.
talk about that in our how to say no
Yeah.
training about, okay. And we suggest that exact strategy, Maria.
Mhm.
Okay, well, help me figure out how to prioritize all this other stuff that I got on my plate.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So the question then becomes, okay, are we creating our own stress?
Mm.
Are we creating our own situations because we're accepting every single meeting that we get invited to? Because we're saying okay to every project that somebody tries to suck us into. You need to be able to say no. You need to be willing to control your own calendar, right? And you need to be strong enough to be able to push back on that stuff. And I wanted, and when next time I see you, which will be here shortly when we go get your Christmas tree, I want to know who you're talking about at Business Automatic. We're at the time, we're at the end of the time that we've got for today. I think it was a great conversation, but it's not what I think, it's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging either myself, our guests, or Success Hacker or Success Coaching. I want to thank all of you for spending time with us, and all of my panelists for the insights, the thoughts, the best practices that you shared. One final note, great CS leaders know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. Once again, we hope to see you at our next webinar after the new year on January 8th, when we'll discuss implementing data-driven customer success. Until then, make sure to make space for yourself every day. I said this before. This is how I log out. Make sure to make space for yourself and your mindset every single day. Have a great rest of your week and month and an amazing holiday season. Happy New Year, everybody.